Hello everyone, my name is Arina Shaikin. At the beginning of the study of environmental science, I got a necessity to have a better comprehension of the global processes that happened on the international governmental levels for improving global environmental problems. That was the reason for choosing global policy and on climate change, Kyoto and Paris Agreement as my subject for the presentation. The issue of the climate change has long been one of the main issues on the world agenda. The issue is regularly discussed at leading negotiating venues including the UN, the G7, the G8, the G20, etc. Global greenhouse gas emissions are increasing year by year, and the link between this process and the global warming has long been proven. The issue of climate change serves as a prime example of the tragedy of communities when some countries pursue short-term interests and predatorily use the common property and don't think about universal damage in the future. The history of discussion of the environmental issue on the international level begins in 1972 with the Stockholm Conference. That was the first world symposium to address the environmental problem at the global level and for the first time in the framework of international law. The Stockholm Conference identified 26 principles and action plan containing 109 recommendations and developed the UN ecological problem. Over the next 20 years, various agencies and international groups were created, but this was not essential. The next worldwide conference was held in Rio in 1992, also known as the Earth Summit or the United Nations Conference on Environmental Protection and Development. The conference brought together representatives of 182 countries in Rio de Janeiro for discussing the future of the planet. During the Earth Summit, a concept of sustainable development was created. The concept describes the environmental process which allows responding to the current needs of citizens without affecting their future interests. Framework Convention on the Climate Change entered into force in 1994. Under this convention held annual conferences, COP, Conferences of the Parties. COP is the supreme body that meets every year, sometimes twice a year, in different places worldwide. COP serves as an official meeting to assess progress in addressing climate change. In addition to COP, there are two subsidiary bodies. The first subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, and the second one is for implementation. Two subsidiary bodies of the convention meet at least twice a year for preparatory work for the conference of the parties, so for this stuff. Under the UN Convention on Climate Change, countries agreed to the need for international measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. That was time for the Kyoto Protocol. Almost all countries have acceded to the protocol. However, in general, the protocol does not provide specific emission reduction obligations for the states that have ratified it. The Kyoto Protocol established legally binding standards for industrialized countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the period from 2008 till 2012. Then followed amended Kyoto 1, Kyoto 2, Kyoto 5, and etc. The mandatory goal provided by the Kyoto Protocol for various countries is maintain greenhouse gas emissions. The international protocol applies to 6 greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. The Kyoto Protocol agreement, signed by more than 191 states and the European Union, and that are another 27 countries. At the same time, the US signed but did not ratify the protocol. Meanwhile, the United States is one of the most potent greenhouse gas generators in the whole industrial world, and it has signed the agreement but never ratified it. Take a look at this visualization of the worldwide CO2 emissions. We can see a part of the emissions that applies to the USA, and which is very large. The Kyoto Protocol is ineffective and cannot provide the drastic reduction in the global greenhouse gas emission. Ongoing negotiations are delayed and did not bring tangible results. The hierarchical nature of the protocol, which sets limitations for all states and enforces them same for every country, is rejected by large developing countries, especially China and India. They emit more and more greenhouse gases. The entry into force of the Kyoto Protocol took place only in February 2005. According to the graph, we can see that, so for example, the CO2 emissions still increase even after ratifying the Kyoto Agreement. So almost all countries did not reach any goals. The protocol has not recognized that the states have different ability to combat climate change due to varying levels of economic development. Besides, a greenhouse gas emission quota was established for each country. It means if a state emits less than allocate quota into the atmosphere of the greenhouse gases, it can sell the surplus to another state, which thereby gets the opportunity to emit more greenhouse gases. The Kyoto Protocol was changed and amended for many years. As a result, there was a need for a new international agreement that could force key greenhouse gas source countries to reduce emissions. That is the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is the result of the climate conference in France. In the Paris Agreement, all projects are aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and provide for the development of national economics and the adaptation of the people's living conditions to climate change. Three main goals of the Paris Agreement are: the first goal is to bring countries to a new level. The second is to take into account the characteristics of each country and take them into account in common ambitious projects. And the third one is transparency. All programs should be published. The Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, and considering after the long period of ratification by individual countries, and it should enter into force finally in this year in 2020. Greenhouse gases continue to accumulate in the atmosphere, setting new records. The concentration level of three gases in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, has reached new record levels. And this means that the planet will continue to heat up, and as a result, future generations will suffer from abnormal heat and other dangerous consequences of climate change. This visualization presents the long-run perspective on global CO2 emissions. Global emissions continue to increase many last years. On the graph, we can see that the US, Europe, and some other regions decrease CO2 emissions. But do not be fooled. Of course, it is easy to reduce greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions by transferring many harmful industries to developing countries. In conclusion, I would like to add, while studying environmental problems during this class, analyzing statistics and preparing for this presentation, so you can see all sources and citations, I came to disappointing conclusion. The volunteer organizations and private initiatives are more successful for solving environmental problems than specialists at the head of our governments. Let's start changing ourselves to that the environment become better in the future. Thank you.